Hello viewers at home, thank you once again for tuning in onto BrandPlus TV today on this very show of Dinner Guide. My name is Chef Andy, your regular host, and today we are going to be taking a beautiful tour of some Kashmiri cooking. We're going to be making some chole masala, and I'm going to be pairing that with some homemade naan. But before we get that far, we'll begin by introducing the ingredients to give you a synopsis of what to expect in the show. So from the very front, I've got some minced ginger. I've also got about a tablespoon of paprika powder, about 4 cloves of garlic, and some chole masala powder. We're also going to require about a tablespoon of unsalted butter, about 4 pods of cardamom, a small teaspoon of fennel seeds, and a few pieces of cherry tomatoes. You'll also require some fresh coriander leaves, some chickpeas that have already been cooked and drained. You'll also require half a white onion, some flour which you'll be using to make your naan, and some flour to dust with. You're also going to require some coconut cream, some salt for seasoning, and some water to make your dough with. But before we get to that point of beginning this very simple dish, I will remind you that this is your chance to grab your pens and papers if you're taking notes, and we'll see you after a short while. See you in a few minutes. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just catching up with us, we've just been introducing the ingredients to my immediate right or to your left, and we're just about to begin the process. So very simply, we're going to start by making our dough. Remember, it's very crucial that you work with your dough way in advance before you're cooking. This gives your dough enough time to sit and prove. It also gives it enough time to really get that gluten working. And then by the time you're actually done with making your chole masala, your pan and your dough will be ready for the going right before we get to the last and final stage of the plating. But before we get there, I'll begin by making our dough. So for this, you will require about 1.5 cups of some all-purpose flour. To that, you will also add a small teaspoon of some salt, so maybe about half a teaspoon. You can also alternatively add a bit of sugar to this stage, but because we're making a very savory dish, we're going to avoid adding any sugar at this stage. And now very simply, using your fingers, proceed to mix your flour and your salt, combining your dry ingredients completely. Once done, proceed to make a well at the center of your bowl. So this, by well, I mean basically making a hole right at the center of your bowl. And all you need to do by doing so is just pulling the dough towards the size of your bowl. And you can now proceed to start adding your liquid bit by bit. So we're going to add about 1/4 cup of water. And we're just going to proceed to work the dough by hand. And as I mentioned, very handy to have some flour to dust with. So proceed to add a little bit of flour. And of course, begin by rubbing the flour on the sides of your bowl. This will aid in detaching any of the stuck bits and pieces of flour. And proceed to reconstitute everything to the center of your bowl, adding a little bit of flour at a time. Now, as your dough continues to reconstitute itself into one big ball at the center of your bowl, proceed to use some flour and rub some of that bit of dough stuck to your fingertips. So at this stage I will also mention, very handy to not waste any of the flour that you're using, and also very important to mention, it is actually very easy to work with flour. You don't really have to rinse your hands as much as a lot of people may presume. So all you need to do to get your hands nice and clean when working with some dough, just dust some flour on your hands or your palm of your hands, and proceed to just rub very lightly on your palms of your fingertips, working through your fingertip centers and around the front. And that should actually allow for you to get some nice clean hands to work with, and just proceed to work your dough. Of course, always making sure to pull the dough right from the outside, pulling everything towards the center. Proceed to dust lightly once more. And just a very simple trick to clean your bowl, just dust your working surface lightly and transfer your dough to the board. And just using your fingertips, proceed to almost scratch or scrape the little bits of flour still remaining in your bowl. Empty those onto the surface of your working table. And all you need to do now is just rub that little bit of dough on your fingertips, making sure to have some clean hands to work with. And very gently proceed to use your dough to pat into the bits of flour that are on your board, and proceed to knead your dough for about another 4 to 5 minutes. This should be enough time for you to get that gluten working and get a nice beautiful consistency to your naan bread much later. So very simply, as I mentioned, begin by pulling the dough towards the center and tuck, and proceed to turn continuously while proceeding with the same process. You can also alternatively just dust both of your hands and proceed to knead your dough on the surface. Of course, very important to mention, very easy technique to make sure to get a nice consistent mixture with your dough. Take quite a bit of time kneading, allow for resting. This should allow for your gluten to really get working, and it will also allow for you to get a nice beautiful consistency at the end of the process. So just proceed to just reconstitute some of the excess flour on your surface. Proceed to knead once more. And this should now take you into the last and final kneading process. Now I like to personally work my dough around the board, making sure to incorporate all the excess flour on the surface. And once completed, all you need to do is reconstitute your ball of dough into a nice firm ball. Grab your bowl that you began with once more and dust very lightly. Allow your ball of flour to sit in the center. Dust very lightly once more. And you can now begin the process of allowing this to rest. So we're just going to place some cling film right over our bowl. And now we're going to allow that to sit for anywhere between 10 to 20 minutes, or rather just until we're done cooking the first stage of our chole masala. And then we're going to come back to the dough, and I'll show you the last and final technique of getting a very beautiful naan. So we're going to rest that on the side, and we're going to clean our surface. Right, just to dust my hands very quickly. And now all you're going to do is proceed to grab your chopping board. And now we're going to start the process of making our chole masala. So very, very importantly, proceed to grab a very sharp knife. Just going to quickly wipe off that excess flour on my hands. Right, now next up, we're going to proceed to start our chole masala. So I'm first of all going to grab the pot that I'll be cooking with. And we're going to begin the process by heating up our pot. And proceed to add a little bit of oil. About a tablespoon of some vegetable oil should be ideal. And now very, very simply proceed to start chopping your onion finely. Taking time to make sure that your onion is nicely finely chopped. Remember, very important to always make sure to have a nice consistency of your ingredients. This will always aid in allowing for perfect cooking times, and it will also give you quite a bit of advantage in the plating process or the presentation. So now proceed, chop the rest of your onion, making sure to discard the root. Once that's done, proceed also to grab about 2 cloves of garlic and proceed to mince or chop those very coarsely. Right, once that's done, proceed to add your garlic to your pot. Add also about a teaspoon of some minced ginger roots. And using a wooden spoon, proceed to mix together. And proceed to fry just up until you have your nice garlic pieces nice and golden in color. And proceed to add your white onion. Mix through thoroughly. Right now we're going to give that a few seconds to color, and while we do so, we'll grab our chole masala, our paprika powder, our cumin and fennel seeds. And very, very quickly with your pestle and mortar, proceed to add in your cardamom pods and your fennel seeds. And using your pestle, proceed to just break up those seeds. This should allow to give a nice, beautiful, aromatic flavor to your dish. Once done, add that to your mixture with the onion and ginger and garlic. Proceed to mix through. Of course, cooking this at medium to low heat in the beginning process. And now you can proceed to add your chole masala and your paprika powder. Proceed to mix through. And once that's combined, we're going to add our chickpeas. Now if I can share a little bit of info on the dish, very, very beautiful Indian dish, of course very vegetarian. Also comes from, the recipe also comes from the Kashmiri region in India. I actually had a chance to try a very, very beautiful place called, it was Cream something in the center of Mumbai. They actually make this on a very regular scale. You can actually be able to have this served fresh every morning in India. So this can actually also substitute for a very, very vegetarian breakfast for those of you who are looking at exploring, or rather it can still also work as a dinner dish for vegetarians as well. And remember, you're not limited to not working with chilies for this recipe. If you do feel that you want that little bit of heat to your dish, do add at least 1 or 2 pieces of chili. It will also give it a nice kick. Right, so our mixture is now nice and fragrant. We're going to proceed to add a bit of water to deglaze our pot. And the water will also aid in allowing you to cool off the pot a little faster. Now once mixed through, we're going to also be incorporating a bit of the rest of the ginger. So I'm only going to add about half a teaspoon. Now mix that through once more. And by this stage, you should actually begin to get a nice, beautiful aroma from your mix. And now all we're going to do is we're going to allow for this to cook for a little bit more, but we're going to allow that to cook at medium heat. And before we allow for that to proceed, we're going to incorporate our coconut cream, adding about a full cup. Now proceed to give that a mix. Right now we're going to allow that to continue simmering on the side, so we are going to move it to one end of our working table. So this should actually proceed to cook for anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes, of course continuously checking it. Remember, it's not complete. We are going to be incorporating some of the ingredients to my right a little bit later. But before we get there, I'm just going to move our board out of the way once more. And now all we're going to do is proceed to make our naan. So very, very crucial, have a bit of flour. For this process, you will also require a rolling pin. And now you can proceed to grab your dough. This has actually now rested quite well. And all we're going to do now is just knead it for about a minute, just to knock down any air pockets that may be in there. Now, very, very importantly, before moving your dough, always make sure that it falls on a dusted surface. This will allow for it to not stick to your working table. And very simply, we're going to divide our dough into 2 equal pieces. Very, very simply proceed to reconstitute them. Now at this stage, you may actually realize that the balls are a little big. Remember, what we're looking for is a nice small size, almost the size of a golf ball. So it is very allowed to just take out a small bit from each piece. And you can proceed to reconstitute your dough once more, and that should give you a nice beautiful size, or golf ball size that you are looking for. Proceed to do the same with the other piece, and you may actually notice that they're almost equally in size. But I'm just going to portion that a little further so that we can get some nice, about 3 equal sizes. So it always takes a bit of time, but remember, with a bit of practice, this actually becomes much easier. Right, so we're going to move those out of the way very quickly. All right, now, very, very importantly, before you proceed the process of rolling out your dough, always make sure to have your pan already on the heat. You should actually give that anywhere between a minute to a minute and a half. This will allow for the pan to really get a nice, beautiful, hot surface to work with. And very simply, proceed to start rolling out your dough, patting it lightly over the top. Turn it once, tap it once more, and you can proceed to roll that out very, very gently. Always remember to turn your dough, dust it quite a bit, but make sure not to dust too much at once. And now proceed to very gently roll out your naan. Dust once more, shake off the excess. And proceed to roll that out to anywhere between 1/5 centimeter in thickness. Right, simple as that, and proceed to do the same for the other pieces. Always tapping the top, turn it once, make sure to have a nice even coating of flour, and proceed to roll out as you did for the first piece. Of course, always making sure to look for that precise thickness. This will allow for it to cook nice and through. And remember, rolling out your dough very thick may actually hinder your dough from cooking through, and you may actually get a very horrible chewy center. So be very, very wary about the thickness of your dough at this stage. Right, now for the last and final piece. Dust once more, tap over, proceed to roll out. Dusting with a little bit of flour on the sides. Also another very, very simple hint to enable you to not dust too much at once. Turn over for the last and final rolling process. And now your naan is ready to go onto the heat. I will share a very small hint I like to use, especially when working with naan. I like to just pour a bit of water on the palm of my hand. Now begin by the first piece. So very, very gently hold it over your hand. Proceed to just coat just a very, very thin coat of water over your dough. Remember, this will aid in allowing for your dough to puff up nice and simple. Will also control the temperature of the dough and the pan, allowing it to cook nice and gently. So into a hot smoky pan goes in your naan. Spread it out nice and gently. And all you need to do now is watch for the air pockets to pop up. And as soon as that happens, we're going to turn the pan over and finish the last and final step. Right, so as I mentioned, a very, very simple technique to making naan. You can also make your own alternative naan or alternative recipe. You can also alternate your ingredients very, very gently by adding maybe some coriander or some garlic or ginger. It will also allow for your naan to get a nice, beautiful, different taste from the usual flat taste. And remember, you can also use the same recipe to actually make the naans, or rather make the dough in advance. Let it rest overnight in the fridge, and you can actually allow it to come to room temperature the following day, and it will actually be able to give you some good naan as well. Right, so now as soon as you just begin to see the air pockets, begin to lift your naan and check for color on the bottom. Once it's nice and colored, proceed to turn over. Now you should actually be able to see it pop up nice and fluffy in the center. It should actually now start to puff up completely. This will be the first sign of you making sure that your naan is actually cooked right through. So proceed to just move that around your pan, evening out the temperature as well. You can also lift this once more just to check for color. And once this is done, we're going to proceed to remove from the heat and allow to rest on the side. And proceed to do the same for the rest of your dough. So once more, begin by grabbing your dough, pat lightly with a nice thin layer of water. Also allowed, you can actually just allow for the water to just drip off if it's in excess. And now proceed to add that to your smoky hot pan once more. Allow it to cook, and as I mentioned, this cooks very, very fast, so do not be tempted to leave your naan cooking and leave your pan unattended. It will actually overcook very, very easily. And as you can see, with a nice, beautiful cooking, you will actually be able to get some nice, soft naan bread. So as we did for the first process, allow for a few minutes to start cooking. Always be sure to check the bottom to make sure it doesn't burn or doesn't color too much. Once nicely colored on the bottom, proceed to turn over. And you should actually be able to do this very, very lightly, very, very simply at home. And as I mentioned, some of these particular techniques we use as chefs on stage. You may not actually be able to get it right every time, or you may not get it perfect the first time. I will recommend, if you're going to be making this for your family and you've not done it before, do take some time and try it out in your kitchen. Remember, a bit of that little bit of failure can actually allow for you to come up with a very, very beautiful thing at the end. So always allow for a bit of mistakes. It is one particular good way of getting your cooking right. Right, so second piece is nice and colored. Going to move that to the side and proceed to do the same for the last piece. But always remember to just clean out your pan as you work. And now repeat the same process. Dough over your hand, water over the surface. And straight it goes into the heat. Allow for it to cook once more. We're going to also proceed to remove some of the items on the table. We are also going to come back in a very short while to plate, but before we do so, we are going to take a break. I'm also going to have a chance to clean my work table, and when we come back, we'll get to the last and final process, and I'll also give you some small hints to add to this very, very simple recipe. Don't touch that dial. We'll be Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are just tuning in, we've just been doing some beautiful naan. We've just finished our chole masala. We're at the last and final stage of plating. But before we do so, our last and final ingredients. Cherry tomatoes first. And some fresh coriander leaves. So very, very quickly, proceed to chop those up. Be sure to discard the stalks. Proceed to mix through. And now your chole masala is ready to serve. Proceed to turn off your heat completely. And begin by pouring your mixture into the bowl of choice that you'll be serving in. Once that's done, place on your plate. and proceed to garnish with some fresh coriander. And now for the last and final bit of your plating, we're going to add our naan. So I'm just going to turn those over so that you can see what they look like as well. And very, very simply, all you need to do is cut those lengthways. And then once more into threes. And all you're going to do now is just fan them off on your chopping board. Easy as that. And using your hands now proceed to add those to your plate, and your chole masala with homemade naan is complete. I do hope you've had some fun today at the show and you've managed to take off something from this particular recipe that you can incorporate into your own cooking at home. Remember also something to mention. For this particular dish, if you are not very much accustomed to using chickpeas, or you may not even know where to find them, remember you can also alternate with your own ingredients. But I will remind you to do a bit of research on your own. Be sure to make sure to find some good recipes out there that will work for you, just like this one worked for me. And for this, we are going to bid you farewell, wishing you a nice, beautiful evening. For those of you who are going to be trying this out, do remember you can always leave your comments, queries, questions, or any particular issues pertaining the dish or the show. We're always very much ready to listen and hear from you. But from the studios, I will bid you farewell, and until the next episode, bye-bye and see you soon.